They tied her in the cowboy's tree. The Apache woman thought he would use her, but instead the sun had begun to sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red. The dry wind carried the smell of dust and sagebrush across the open plains.
In the middle of this vast, lonely land, a young Apache woman moved carefully, her feet barely making a sound against the parched earth.
She had been traveling for hours, weaving between the sparse trees and rocky outcrops, alert to every sound. Her heart beat fast, not just from the long journey, but from the knowledge that strangers, especially men with guns, she had grown up hearing stories from her elders about the dangers of the outside world. She knew that travelers, cowboys, and settlers often carried fear, anger, and sometimes cruelty in their hearts. She had learned to watch, to listen, and to trust her instincts above all else. Still, nothing could have fully prepared her for what was about to happen. She had stopped near a lone tree to rest, hoping to drink from the small stream that ran beneath it. She knelt beside the water, cupping her hands to take a sip, when a shadow fell across her. Looking up, her breath caught. A figure emerged from the brush, a man on horseback, wearing worn leather boots, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and a weathered coat that flapped in the wind. He carried no weapon in sight, yet the way he moved and the hard lines of his face made her heart race. Before she could react, rough hands seized her, and she felt herself being lifted and moved. Her legs swung helplessly as she was tied to a sturdy tree, the coarse rope biting into her wrists. Fear shot through her like lightning. Her mind raced, imagining all the terrible things that might follow. She had heard of cowboys who did not hesitate to take what they wanted from anyone they encountered. The thought made her stomach churn, and she struggled against the ropes, but they were tied too tightly. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back. She could not afford to show weakness. Survival had always demanded courage and a clear mind. Her eyes darted around, searching for anything that might give her an advantage. A sharp stone, a broken branch, anything she could use. But there was nothing. The man's horse pawed the ground impatiently nearby, and she could hear his deep, steady breathing. Her mind raced with questions. Why had he taken her? Was he going to harm her, or was this some strange misunderstanding? She had to prepare herself for the worst. The air around her seemed heavier, as if the very desert was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Or she could hear the faint rustle of leaves as the man approached the tree. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to fight, to run, to do whatever it took to escape. Yet, as he drew closer, something in the way he moved caught her attention. There was no rush in his steps, no wild anger or aggression. He moved slowly, carefully, almost as if he were aware of her fear and did not wish to make it worse. His eyes, partly hidden by the brim of his hat, were sharp and observing, but not cruel. He paused a few feet away from her, looking her over. For the first time since being tied to the tree, she allowed herself a moment to study him. His clothes were worn and dusty, showing that he had spent many days on the trail. His face was weathered, with lines that suggested a hard life, but there was something calm in his expression, a quiet strength that made her hesitate. Perhaps he was not like the others she had feared. Perhaps not everyone who carried a gun or wore a leather coat was dangerous. Still, she could not let her guard down. She pulled against the ropes again, testing their strength. They held firm. Panic and frustration mingled in her chest. She had to think fast. She had to understand what kind of man he was before it was too late. The man squatted down a few feet away, carefully placing his hat on the ground. He spoke, his voice low but clear, carrying easily in the quiet desert air. "Easy now," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." She stared at him, disbelief and fear warring within her. His words were unexpected. Who spoke to captives this way? She had expected anger, threats, perhaps worse. But not this calm tone, not this strange patience. Why am I tied? She asked, her voice trembling. To keep you safe, he replied, his eyes steady. There are things out here that could hurt you if you're not careful. I didn't mean to frighten you, but you shouldn't be wandering alone so far from your people. She blinked, trying to understand. The word sounded reasonable, but could she trust him? She had been taught that strangers rarely offered help without expecting something in return. And yet, his actions so far had not matched the threats she had imagined. He had not touched her roughly, had not spoken harshly, had not made a single move that suggested danger. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to breathe more slowly.
She studied him again.
There was a faint scar along his cheek, a mark that told of past struggles. His hands were strong, capable of violence, but they rested calmly in his lap. He was not smiling, but there was no malice in his eyes. As the sun dipped lower, shadow stretched across the land. The tree she was tied to seemed to glow in the warm light, highlighting her tense posture and the ropes that bound her. The cowboy remained patient, sitting quietly, giving her space, yet keeping a careful watch. There was a strange rhythm to his presence, steady, predictable, almost reassuring despite the situation. Hours passed, the sky darkened, stars began to appear, and the desert night settled in with its familiar chill.
She had not expected this patience.
Most captors, if they could not take what they wanted immediately, would have grown impatient or angry. This man had done neither. Her mind began to wander, recalling stories her grandmother had told about unexpected kindness in dangerous situations, about strangers who, against all odds, helped rather than harmed. Could this be one of those rare moments? She forced herself to remain alert, but the thought lingered, offering a strange warmth in the cold desert night. The cowboy finally stood, stretching his stiff legs. He moved toward a small bundle near his horse, carefully untied a piece of cloth, and returned to her side. He knelt down, placing it gently on the ground. Here, he said. Drink this. It will help you feel stronger. Her eyes widened. Water? He had brought her water. Not a weapon, not a threat, but something to help her survive. Tentatively, she reached out, cupping the water in her hands. The cool liquid touched her lips, soothing the dryness and giving her a small but important sense of relief.
You don't have to be afraid of me, he said.
I know this is frightening, but I mean no harm. Just trust that I'm not like the others you feared. She studied him silently, weighing every word, every gesture. Her heart still raced, but the fear that had gripped her so tightly began to loosen, just slightly. Perhaps he truly meant what he said. Perhaps he was not a threat, but someone who understood the dangers of the desert and the value of life. Night fell completely, and the world became quiet, except for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a coyote. She remained tied to the tree, but her mind was less consumed by panic. She could think, plan, and watch. She could observe this man and decide whether he could be trusted. The cowboy remained nearby, neither too close nor too distant, giving her space while keeping a careful eye on her. His presence was steady, a reminder that even in the harsh, unforgiving wilderness, not every human carried danger. Some, against all odds, carried care, patience, and understanding. As the night deepened, she leaned back against the rough bark of the tree, exhausted from fear and tension. Her thoughts drifted, mixing caution with curiosity. Who was this man? Why had he stopped to help her instead of taking advantage of her fear? And could she survive this night with him, rather than against him? Sleep was distant, but her body relaxed slightly. She knew the desert would demand vigilance at dawn, but for now she allowed herself to rest, if only a little. The ropes around her wrists were still tight, but they no longer felt like chains meant to destroy her. They were temporary, part of a strange and uneasy pause in the wilderness. Somewhere deep in the night, a sense of hope quietly took root, fragile but persistent. And though she did not know it yet, the events that began with fear and uncertainty would slowly transform, revealing lessons about trust, humanity, and the unexpected kindness that can appear even in the most unlikely places. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the promise of a new day, a day where the boundaries between fear and trust, danger and safety would begin to blur. And the Apache woman, tied to the cowboy's tree, waited, her heart caught between caution and the faint stirrings of belief in something better. The first light of dawn broke slowly over the horizon, painting the desert in soft pinks and pale golds. The air was still crisp and dry, carrying the faint scent of sage and the warmth of the rising sun. The Apache woman awoke to the feeling of the sun on her face, her body sore from the long night tied to the tree. The ropes around her wrists had loosened slightly during the night, but they still held her securely. She blinked against the brightening sky, trying to piece together what had happened. The cowboy was already awake, sitting a few feet away, tending to his horse. He moved with quiet precision, brushing the dust from the animal's coat and checking its hooves. Every motion he made was deliberate, careful, and calm. Yet there was strength in his hands and shoulders that told of a life spent mastering the rugged land. Her fear returned in a small wave, but it was tempered by the memory of last night, the water he had given her, the patience in his voice, and the lack of cruelty in his actions. She watched him, curiosity warring with caution. Was he truly not a threat? Could she trust him, even a little? As she studied him, he looked up and caught her gaze. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, two strangers in the vast wilderness. Then he spoke.
"You need to eat," he said quietly.
There's some bread and dried meat in my pack. It won't be much, but it will give you strength." She hesitated. Hunger tugged at her stomach, but her instincts told her to be careful. She knew that accepting help could be risky. But then she remembered the desert night, the chill, the long hours tied to the tree, and the strange steadiness in his presence. Slowly, she nodded.
I
will, she said. He moved closer and untied one of the ropes, enough to allow her hands some freedom, despair. Carefully, he handed her the small bundle. She took it with trembling hands, grateful for the nourishment, yet still alert to any sign of danger. She ate slowly, savoring the simple food, and allowed herself a small measure of trust.
While she ate, he watched her without judgment.
There was no rush, no demand, only quiet observation.
She noticed small details, the way he adjusted his hat to keep the sun out of his eyes, the careful way he tended to his horse, the faint scar along his cheek that hinted at past hardships. There was a story in those details, one that she could not yet read fully, but she sensed there was depth beneath his rugged exterior. The desert began to awaken with sound. Birds called to each other from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote barked. The morning was alive, yet it felt isolated, as if they were the only two people for miles. The woman's mind wandered, considering her options. She could try to escape, but the ropes and the distance from her people made it risky. And yet, She did not feel the immediate need to flee. There was something different about this man. After a time, he spoke again.
You must be tired.
You've been traveling far. His voice was calm, but there was a careful awareness in it, as if he could read her thoughts without words. I am, she admitted, her voice small. I was traveling alone. I didn't expect. Her words faltered. She didn't want to reveal too much, but she felt a strange pull to explain. I didn't expect anyone to help. He nodded slightly. Help can come from unexpected places. Sometimes the land itself tests you. Sometimes people. You survived the night tied to that tree. That shows strength, even if you didn't see it in yourself. She looked at him, puzzled. His words were strange, almost gentle, and yet they carried truth. She had survived, yes, but she had done so through fear and caution, not trust. The idea that strength could exist alongside fear was unfamiliar, yet comforting. The cowboy stood and moved toward his horse again.
We need to get moving, he said. The desert is unforgiving.
Shade and water won't wait, and neither will the sun. She hesitated. Moving with you? She asked, unsure of what he meant. Yes, he said simply. I will help you.
There is a small settlement not far from here. Water, food, a chance to rest properly.
Becked. You cannot survive the desert on your own for long. The idea of traveling with a stranger was frightening, yet the thought of staying in the open desert alone was far worse. She weighed her options carefully, trying to remember all the lessons she had learned about survival, trust, and reading people. Slowly, she nodded. I will go with you, she said. He untied her wrists completely and offered a hand to help her stand. She accepted, testing the strength of his grip. It was firm but careful, steady but not forceful. She felt a strange sense of security she had not expected. They began walking together, the morning sun rising higher and warming the desert. At first the woman kept a distance, her body tense and alert. She listened for every sound, the wind rustling the dry leaves, the distant calls of birds, the faint crunch of their footsteps on the hard earth. She had learned to read the desert like a map, and every movement mattered. The cowboy walked beside her, occasionally glancing over to make sure she was keeping pace. His presence was reassuring in a subtle way. He did not speak much, but the quiet rhythm of his steps, the careful way he moved through the rugged terrain, communicated safety and competence. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the desert heat began to press against them. They found a small patch of shade beneath a rocky outcrop and stopped to rest. The cowboy offered her more water, and she drank deeply, grateful. She felt her body relax slightly, the tension easing from her shoulders. You have traveled far, he said after a moment, breaking the silence. Where are you from? She hesitated. Trust was not easily given, and names could carry danger. I am from my people, she said cautiously.
Far to the west. I was on my way to visit relatives.
He nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further. There was respect in the way he listened, a recognition that some stories were private and needed protection. The woman felt a small flicker of relief. He did not demand her story, did not question her motives. He simply acknowledged her words and let them rest. As they rested, the cowboy shared small details of his own life, careful not to overstep. He spoke of the land, of survival, of the ways he had learned to read the desert and predict danger. He did not boast or claim superiority, but his words carried experience and knowledge. The woman listened, learning from him even as she remained cautious. It began to ease. The desert was still harsh and unforgiving, but the small acts of care, the sharing of water, the patient guidance, the quiet presence, began to build a fragile bridge of trust. She still watched him carefully, still prepared for danger, but a part of her began to hope that perhaps he truly meant no harm. By midday they reached a small stream, where the woman knelt to drink and wash some of the dust from her face. The cowboy remained nearby, standing guard without intruding. She noticed how he moved through the land as if he were part of it, reading the signs of danger and safety with practiced ease. For the first time since being tied to the tree, she allowed herself a small smile. It was not complete trust, not yet, but it was a recognition that not all strangers were enemies, that survival sometimes required cooperation, and that kindness could appear even in the most unlikely places. As they prepared to continue their journey, she realized something important. Fear had guided her for so long, but courage and caution could coexist. She could be careful and still allow herself to accept help when it was offered with respect and care. Ooh! She could survive not just through avoidance and suspicion, but through observation, judgment, and the willingness to see humanity where she had expected none. The desert stretched out before them, endless and challenging, yet the journey felt a little less lonely. The cowboy's presence was a reminder that even in the harshest of places, trust could grow slowly, carefully, and without demand. And though she still remained wary, a quiet sense of possibility took root. A belief that she might not only survive, but learn, grow, and discover unexpected allies along the way. By late afternoon, they spotted the faint outlines of a small settlement in the distance. Dust rose from the few paths that led to it, and the warm glow of sunlit buildings offered a promise of rest and safety. The woman's steps quickened slightly, but she remained mindful of the cowboy walking beside her.
He glanced at her, understanding her caution. "Soon," he said simply.
Ah! The small settlement grew closer with every step, its low buildings and dusty streets becoming clearer against the horizon. The Apache woman felt a mixture of relief and caution. Relief, because the journey through the harsh desert was nearly over, and caution because she had learned that even in towns, danger could appear in many forms. She kept her eyes sharp, her senses alert to every sound. The creak of a wooden door, the clatter of a cart, the distant shouts of children at play. The cowboy walked beside her, steady and silent, giving her space to observe. His presence was a quiet comfort, a reminder that someone experienced and cautious was there to guide her. She still did not fully trust him, not yet, but the anxiety that had gripped her during the previous night had eased. He had shown patience, respect, and care, and she had begun to see him not as a captor or stranger, but as a fellow human navigating the harshness of the world. As they entered the edge of the settlement, the cowboy slowed, allowing her to take in her surroundings. The town was small, with a few wooden houses, a general store, and a stable where horses were tied. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking bread and roasted meat. Children ran along the dusty streets, laughing and shouting, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the long hours of travel and tension the woman had endured. "Stay close," the cowboy said softly. "Keep an eye out for anyone who might cause trouble, but don't be afraid. Most people here are honest, hard-working folks." She nodded, observing the townspeople as they moved about their daily routines. There were men repairing fences, women hanging laundry, and traders carrying baskets of goods. Nothing seemed threatening, yet her caution remained. Years of survival had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. She moved carefully, her steps deliberate, matching her breathing to the rhythm of her cautious heart. The cowboy led her toward the general store where he gestured for her to wait outside while he entered to speak with the owner. She stood in the shade, leaning slightly against the wall, and watched the activity around her. A few curious eyes glanced in her direction, but no one approached aggressively. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the settlement and making the dust shimmer in the heat. Minutes passed, and the cowboy returned carrying a small bundle. Food, clean water, and some supplies, he explained. You'll need them for the journey ahead. And there's a room you can rest in tonight.
The owner agreed to let us use it.
She accepted the bundle, gratitude shining in her eyes.
Thank you, she said softly. I did not expect anyone to help me like this. He nodded. Best, help can come in many forms. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's kindness. Both are valuable in their own way. Noticing the way he spoke without judgment, without expectation. There was no demand for repayment, no hidden motives, only a steady presence and practical assistance. Slowly, a thought formed in her mind. Perhaps this man was teaching her something beyond mere survival. Perhaps he was showing her that trust could exist, even in a world that had often been cruel. They spent the afternoon gathering supplies and preparing for the next leg of her journey. The woman observed how the cowboy handled each task with efficiency and care. He tied the bundle securely, checked the horse's harness, and mapped a route in his mind for safe travel through the desert. Every action was deliberate, thoughtful, and respectful of the land and the people who lived there. During a quiet moment, she asked a question that had been on her mind for some time. "Why are you helping me?" she said, her voice cautious but curious.
The cowboy looked at her, meeting her eyes steadily. Because it's the right thing to do, he replied simply.
Because survival isn't just about protecting yourself. Sometimes it's about protecting others too.
And because I've seen too many people get hurt when no one steps in to help. His words lingered in her mind, resonating with something deep inside her.
She had spent so much of her life relying solely on herself, wary of strangers, and expecting danger at every turn.
The idea that someone could act purely out of care, without expectation or demand, was foreign and yet comforting.
As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, they prepared to leave. The cowboy led the way to the edge of the settlement, ensuring the horse was ready and the path ahead was clear. She followed, her steps cautious but more confident than they had been that morning. The desert awaited them once more, stretching endlessly under the vast sky. But this time, the journey felt different. She was no longer alone in the harsh landscape. There was someone beside her, steady and reliable, offering guidance and support. The fear that had dominated her thoughts during the long night tied to the tree had transformed into cautious trust, and a new sense of possibility took root. As they traveled, the cowboy shared his knowledge of the land. He pointed out signs of water, shaded resting spots, and safe routes through rocky terrain. His instructions were practical, clear, and precise, and she absorbed them eagerly. Each piece of guidance was a lesson in survival, a way to navigate the harsh world without succumbing to fear. She began to see the value of his presence beyond mere protection. His experience and wisdom were teaching her to read the desert in ways she had never known. And she noticed subtle changes, the way the wind shifted, the tracks left by animals, the way shadows marked the movement of the sun. With his guidance, she felt more capable, more aware, and more connected to the land. By evening, they reached a small grove where they decided to camp. The cowboy gathered firewood and started a small, controlled fire. The warmth and light offered comfort against the cooling desert night. She watched him work, appreciating the quiet efficiency with which he moved. There was no boastfulness in his actions, no need to display strength or dominance, only calm competence and respect for the environment. She knelt beside the fire, her mind wandering. She thought of her family, of her people, and of the lessons she had learned about fear, survival, and trust. The events of the past 2 days had challenged her assumptions about the world and the people in it. The cowboy had not acted as she had expected. He had not harmed her. Nor had he sought to take advantage of her fear. Instead, he had guided her, protected her, and allowed her to retain her dignity and independence. As the night deepened, they spoke in quiet tones. In another desk, savage dog set every part of my path. She shared small pieces of her story, her journey, her people, and her experiences in the desert. He listened without interruption, without judgment, occasionally offering insight or advice drawn from his own life. Their conversation was cautious, yet there was a growing sense of connection. Two strangers, brought together by circumstance, beginning to understand each other through shared experiences and careful communication. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the darkening sky. The desert night was alive with sound, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the subtle movements of nocturnal creatures. Yet in that small circle of light and warmth, a fragile sense of security emerged. She realized that she was no longer alone, that trust, even if tentative, was possible, and that survival was not just about avoiding danger, but also about accepting guidance and support when it was offered with respect. They settled down for the night, sleeping near the fire with the horse tethered nearby. She remained alert, but her body relaxed more than it had during the previous night. The cowboy's presence was reassuring, a steady rhythm of breathing and warmth that allowed her to rest without the constant fear of immediate danger. Before sleep fully claimed her, she reflected on the journey so far. Fear had brought her to the tree, but patience, care, and understanding had carried her beyond it. The desert had tested her. The unknown had challenged her. And yet she had found a path forward, guided by someone who had shown that kindness and competence could coexist with strength. She realized that the world was not entirely cruel, that trust could grow slowly, and that connection, even with strangers, could be a source of strength. And though she remained cautious, a quiet determination took root. She would continue to survive, to learn, and to navigate the harsh landscape with both awareness and hope. The fire burned low, and the stars appeared overhead, brilliant and countless. In the vastness of the desert, she felt a sense of perspective. Small, perhaps, but not insignificant. She was part of a larger world, a world where danger and kindness existed side by side, and where understanding could emerge from fear. The cowboy stirred slightly, adjusting the horse and tending to the fire one last time. She watched him, appreciating his steady presence, and realized that she had begun to trust him, not blindly, not completely, but enough to allow herself to hope. Hope for safety, for guidance, and for a future where survival could be paired with understanding and respect. As sleep finally embraced her, the desert night continued its quiet song. The fire dimmed, the stars shimmered, and the bond between two strangers, one cautious, one patient, grew stronger in the silence. And though the challenges of the desert were far from over, she faced them with a new perspective. Fear tempered by trust, vigilance balanced with understanding, and a growing awareness that survival could be shared rather than endured alone. The desert morning arrived with a soft golden light, spreading warmth over the rocky terrain. The Apache woman stirred from her sleep, feeling a mixture of calm and anticipation. She stretched carefully, mindful of her muscles, sore but strong after the long journey. The cowboy was already awake, tending to the horse and the small campfire that had cooled overnight. A faint smell of smoke and earth filled the air.
They had one more stretch to travel before reaching a distant river where her people often passed through or gathered.
The cowboy had assured her that once they reached the river, she would be near safety and familiar territory. Yet even with this promise, she kept her senses alert. The desert, she had learned, could change quickly. Shadows could hide dangers, and every sound might hold a warning.
"Are you ready?" the cowboy asked quietly, without turning to look at her.
His voice was calm, steady, the same as it had been since the first morning they had traveled together. She nodded, gripping the reins of the horse for balance. "Yes," she said. I am ready. As they mounted and continued along the dusty trail, a subtle tension filled the air. The desert seemed quieter than usual, and the wind carried no familiar sense of water or sage. Every few steps, the woman glanced around, scanning for signs of wildlife or hidden obstacles. She had learned from the cowboy's guidance to read the land, and each movement of the sand, each rustle of leaves drew her attention. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, until a distant shimmer appeared along the horizon. At first it looked like a mirage, the kind she had been taught to watch for and ignore. But as they moved closer, the shimmer solidified into the glittering surface of a river, sunlight dancing on its gentle ripples. Her heart leapt.
Relief and hope surged, washing over the caution that had guided her for so long.
The cowboy slowed the horse, letting her take in the sight. There, he said simply, water, shade, bay. She dismounted quickly, letting her feet touch the soft sand near the riverbank. She bent down and cupped the cool water in her hands, drinking deeply. The sensation was more than thirst-quenching. It was a reminder that survival was possible, that guidance and trust could lead to life instead of fear. She washed her face and arms, letting the water carry away some of the dust and weariness from the long journey. The cowboy remained nearby, unspeaking, watching her with steady, quiet attention. She could see the respect in his posture, the patience in his expression. He did not rush her, did not demand anything, only allowed her the time and space she needed. After a few moments, she turned to him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I did not expect someone to care so much, to guide me like this." He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's not about expectation. It's about survival. It's about doing what's right when you can. You would do the same for someone else if you had the chance." I studied him, taking in the weathered face, the steady eyes, and the careful movements that had carried her safely across the desert. He was different from what she had feared, strong, patient, and kind in ways that did not demand recognition, as she realized that she had misjudged him at first, as the world had taught her to misjudge strangers. And yet, he had shown her that trust, even when fragile, could exist. They rested briefly by the river, allowing the horse to drink and graze while they recovered from the long morning ride. She observed the cowboy, noticing how he carefully inspected the surroundings, aware of everything while remaining calm. There was a rhythm to his actions, a balance of caution and confidence that seemed perfectly suited to the desert. As the sun moved higher, the journey resumed. They followed the riverbank, where shade from scattered trees offered temporary relief from the heat. Small birds darted through the branches, and the occasional rabbit hopped among the rocks. Each sight reminded the Apache woman of life's persistence, the way the land endured and adapted, and the way she herself had endured through fear and uncertainty. The cowboy spoke occasionally, pointing out safe paths, warning of slippery rocks, and explaining subtle signs of changing terrain. She listened carefully, absorbing each word. His guidance was practical, but it carried lessons beyond survival, lessons about observation, patience, and understanding the world as it truly was, rather than as fear made it appear. Midday came, and the sun hung high in the sky. They stopped under a large mesquite tree, the shade deep and cool. The woman rested against its trunk, feeling her muscles relax. She thought of her people, of her family, and of the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She realized that fear, though useful, had also limited her. The trust she had begun to place in the cowboy had opened possibilities she had not expected. Possibilities of help, safety, and human connection.
"You've learned quickly," the cowboy said quietly, watching her from across the tree.
Not just how to move through the desert, but how to trust carefully. That's not easy. Many never learn it. She looked at him, a small smile breaking through the tension she had carried for days.
I had to, she said. I had no choice.
But I see now that trust can be a tool, not just a risk. You've shown me that. Narration. He nodded. Good. Tests. Remember it. The desert tests everyone. Some survive through fear alone, but those who combine caution with trust, those are the ones who thrive. Their conversation paused as the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of human voices. The woman's senses sharpened immediately, her body tensing. The cowboy noticed, glancing in the same direction, and both moved silently toward a small rise overlooking the river. From this vantage point, they saw a small group approaching, a few travelers heading along the riverbank, unaware of their presence. The woman instinctively ducked behind a rock, but the cowboy placed a steady hand on her shoulder.
No need to hide, he whispered. They are friendly. Farmers or travelers heading this way. We have nothing to fear.
She studied him carefully, weighing his words against her instincts. The silence. Slowly, she nodded. His presence had taught her when to act with caution and when to allow herself to relax. She took a deep breath, lowering her body from behind the rock. The travelers passed by without incident, waving politely at the river, their friendly demeanor confirming the cowboy's judgment. The rest of the journey was uneventful but measured with careful attention. They traveled side by side, the woman's trust in the cowboy solidifying with every step. She noticed his quiet habits, how he adjusted the horse's harness, how he watched the land for subtle changes, and how he always ensured her comfort without words. She realized that true trust was not about blind faith, but about consistent action over time. By late afternoon, they finally reached a familiar bend in the river where her people often traveled or camped. The sight of the flowing water and the shaded banks brought a deep sense of relief. She dismounted, letting the horse drink and graze, and inhaled the scent of the river, feeling the tension in her body ease. "This is where I part ways," she said softly, turning to the cowboy. Her voice carried gratitude, respect, and a quiet sadness. "From here, I can travel safely to my people."
You've done well. Remember what you've learned.
Use it to stay safe and to help others when you can.
She stepped closer, offering a small, respectful bow of her head. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." He gave a faint smile, tipping his hat slightly. "Take care," he replied. "The desert is harsh, but you are stronger than you know. Never forget that." With a final glance, she turned and began following the riverbank, her steps careful but confident. Each step carried the lessons of the journey, the patience, the observation, the cautious trust, and the unexpected kindness she had received. She realized that she had grown, not just in skill, but in understanding the world and herself. The cowboy watched her go until she disappeared from view, then mounted his horse and prepared to continue his own path. Their journey together had ended, but its impact would remain. He had guided her through fear, danger, and uncertainty, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and with a new sense of possibility. As the sun set behind the distant hills, casting the desert in hues of orange and purple, both travelers reflected silently on the journey. One had learned the value of patience, observation, and human connection. The other had reminded someone wary of the world that kindness, respect, and steady guidance could exist even in harsh, unforgiving places. And so the desert held its quiet beauty, carrying the lessons of survival, trust, and understanding across the sands and rivers, leaving the echoes of their journey behind. An Apache woman walking toward her people, a cowboy riding onward into the vast, endless wilderness, and a story of courage, patience, and humanity that would endure in memory. Place to rest. "You will be safe there." She nodded, grateful, yet aware that the desert had taught her well. Safety could be temporary, trust must be earned, and every step must be measured. Still, she allowed herself to feel a small spark of relief, a quiet hope that this day, which had begun in fear, might end with a measure of security and understanding.